We're on Facebook Live and Twitter with our post show, continuing our discussion about generational wealth. We've got a couple of questions already, but I want Terry to allow you to finish your conversation about Aretha having no will and how shocking it was for many of us.
I mean, especially since she had been sick for a long time, so this wasn't like a sudden death. And I do think it is something that as a community we need to change our mindset. That, in fact, you know, preparing, whether it's a will, whether it's thinking about our debt, thinking about insurance, thinking about ways in which, you know, our business even, and having a succession plan, you know, how do we sort of take all of the resources that we have and entrust it in a way that it isn't sort of frittered away. I remember my great-grandmother who had a lot of resources and then passed away without a will. And then people come out of the woodworks and, you know, you have to go to probate. And, exactly. And so I think that's a huge change in mindset we have to have about wealth building, wealth generation, and generational wealth.
And I just want to add something about Aretha specifically. What shocked me was at her funeral, Isaiah Thomas got up. I don't know if you all, because it was a long funeral, so you might not have heard this part, but he got up to say that he was a young man and didn't know what to do with his money, and she sat him down and said, this is what you're supposed to be doing. So he said he wouldn't have had anything. So how is it that she...
I think it's really simple. I think Aretha Franklin was a very good manager of her own resources, but I don't think she believed that she could identify one person to entrust with those resources after her death.
So she just never made a decision.
And so she was, there was ambivalence. And I think she had a lot of trauma in her life.
Yes, she did.
And that trauma really interferes with our ability to make the hard decisions. You know, we all are going to die. But the trauma, the hard work that what's required to earn that wealth is something you believe you can hold on to in your grave, and of course you can't. So I think it's a growth mindset, but it's I think perhaps what she wasn't able to do is to nurture in her kids this same management mindset that she had.
Because she was not playing about her money.
She was that purse that she had. She would never leave a place without having been paid. She was serious about money, and she knew how to grow it. But it would appear that she couldn't identify anyone to whom to transfer her wealth. It is a big decision.
Yes, it is.
It is a big decision.
Well, it's interesting you say that. I'm sorry.
There's a couple questions I want to get to, unless you want to just add something you want to add.
Well, it pushes the responsibility on us as parents and grandparents to really have that training and that education to our next generation.
Those conversations, exactly.
And what you're doing and so forth. And one thing I did early with my now 13-year-old is I got her a debit card early. And now she's looking at the statements and so forth. So you understand, you appreciate money. And I think it's good for us to introduce it to them as early as possible and work with them around it.
Yeah, I wish I'd had more training about that, believe me. So it's a couple of questions. First, about finding out information online, financial information online. What do you all recommend? Is there plenty? I know you're talking about working in the digital space. You want to talk about that?
Absolutely. So in terms of just finding articles online, I mean, you can Google right now and say, you know, budgeting tips. They're really what's been amazing about to say even the past 10 to 15 years is that there's been a democratization of this education. So it's no longer one source. It's no longer one financial advisor or one wealth management institution that's holding this information. And so,
are there particular programs that, and you mentioned Mint in passing, but that people could engage in their kind of budgeting and online?
Absolutely. I mean,
I'm not throwing that out there.
No, I love it. There's one called Mom and Dad Money. There's a financial advisor who just really takes you into his personal life in some ways. He's also, it's a way for him to manage his practice. You know, I use, my family, we use a platform called Capital that allows us to put money away. You know, you could say just automatically move $5 out of the account every day. So it's something that you wouldn't miss. But it kind of, over time, you know, you can end up with like a few $100s to a couple $1,000s over the course of the year, completely without anything more than just setting up one simple rule. So between reading, blogs such as that, I love the New York Times and their section on money, just picking up articles, Refinery 29. There's a whole slew of it. But I think what's really great is that you don't have to go far to get this information. Literally, it's just you can put in budgeting tips, and a whole host of information will come for you.
And how about online investment groups that may have a black focus? I think people are interested in that. Anybody know? Terry, you might be having to set that up.
I know. Well, I did want to mention on online education. We actually just launched an online financial literacy curriculum with EverFi, and it's at OneUnite.com/financial education. And we give actually badges and recognition and points if you take different playlists. And it's all online, and you can access it from your phone, because we saw that our community really did need that education. So we just launched that about a month ago. And it's really done really well, because people want it, but it needs to be easy to access, and so you can literally access it from your phone. In terms of investments, so we don't do investments, but I do wonder whether or not online investing, and really maybe this is a question for you, Zimora, is that the way to go, or is it more group sort of investment clubs or something?
They're
I wonder.
People are
true.
interested.
I mean, index funds is the way to go, right? Is that just why save some
I know there's
fees and
there's that
outperform the
huge
market?
disclaimer of exactly,
Sorry.
but it's a great question. I think it's twofold. What I would love to see, and again, I'm always finding new tools and places. So maybe it already exists, but the ways that we've seen Betterment and Wealthfront come up, I'd love to see similar companies led with leadership of color also participating in this, and also kind of helping and participating in the accumulation of wealth in that particular way. But in terms of what's best to do, I'd always say that really is very much dependent on everyone's particular situation. I think it's at this point really about the awareness of the different mechanisms to both save money and put it away in a mindful capacity. Again, Mary brought up a great point about the vulnerability that comes with of poverty, and the fact that if you don't have emergency savings, about 40% of this country, regardless of race, just cannot even handle an emergency that would cost about $400. That is startling when you think about that. $400 could completely knock you off your feet, and that is incredibly vulnerable. And so thinking about how do you build up your savings and have and manage that along with credit card debt, medical debt, all that kind of stuff, before we even get to buying a home. And then from there, how do you start actually making sure that you're not upside down in terms of what you're bringing in versus what you're spending? And then from there also, sometimes there's a hierarchy mentality where I can't invest or put money away until I've either saved or done something else fundamental. But what's great about the platforms that are out today is that the threshold for participating is no longer $1,000. It's often $1, $5. Some of them it's just zero. Just open up the account and make a free. Fidelity has done that recently.
Well, you were jumping to a question we just got, but I wanted you to repeat your website address first.
Yep. One United, OneUnited.com/financial education.
Okay. So one of the questions we got was if you're a student trying to deal with your loans, and how do you save? So your answer is there's some program for everybody where you wouldn't have to put aside very much, just start something.
Exactly. That is, I think that's the biggest takeaway, is just start. It's that you don't have to wait to reach a certain level. You can take advantage of certain platforms. Again, I offered Capital, but there are others. Even your own, some banks you have to watch out in terms of fees. Some banks will charge you a fee for opening up another savings account or whatnot. But the idea is that you can actively participate, and also continue to have conversations with your institutions, whether it's your direct bank where you have your checking and savings, or even the holder of your student loan. There's often ways to negotiate what you owe and to make sure that you are staying current with your payments.
So next question is, what happens if family members sell off the assets that the entire family has built, has to earn? You better get it and let you off.
I've been thinking about that a lot. My son speaks to me about it a lot. So I think there are two sorts of ways of thinking about it. So a friend of mine tells me often that his son tells him, "Daddy, don't spend my inheritance."
Very direct.
So that's sort of a way of saying there is an expectation that the boomers will transfer wealth to millennials, to Gen Xers, Y Xers, and so on. But many boomers don't, even wealthy ones, like Bill Gates, for example. He said his kids will get something, but they won't get everything, right? So I think the last literature I read on boomers, so boomers want to live fully the life they have left, and they want to give to charities and so on, and they want to leave something, but they don't want to leave everything to their children. But I think the kids think, you really need to be more prudent with your funds so that we get a head start.
Right.
And I think they feel that way because we're now in a much more integrated society, and they can see how they're relatively disadvantaged.
Yes.
You know, they're no longer absolutely disadvantaged, but the relative deprivation really works on their brains in a way that it didn't work on mine, because there wasn't much occupational differentiation amongst my parents and their peers. There was a little more in my generation, and now much more, and so on. So I think there's some complexities that are associated with generational ideas and frameworks that we have to have conversations about, really as a nation, but certainly as a community of African Americans. So that's one piece. But I think the second piece is that colleges do different work for different students. And because the college-going enrollment is flattening a bit, over time the college fees are going to dampen down a little bit. We're seeing it already. So there are some colleges, like community colleges in this state. Quincy does better at propelling low-income students to the middle class than its peers. Quincy might not even know that, right? So the question becomes why? What's the mechanism that actually allows a kid whose parents earn $25,000 a year to go to Quincy, and 4 years later, they're earning $50,000 a year? It doesn't sound like a lot, but it's tremendous.
That's a lot,
right?
Yes.
And so if you look at, this is just a community college space, but the same work has been done for all of the colleges in the United States. I'm just saying, simply, we have to do a better job helping young people choose their pathways, whether it's a career pathway straight out of high school, where they get certificates or apprenticeships. Experiential learning is the most important thing that a student can show on the resume. I did an internship, I did an apprenticeship, I did a gap year, I volunteered, because it tells somebody a lot about your growth mindset. So the growth mindset is something that we have to learn how to nurture in our children. And even though it's hard, we have to nurture that in ourselves too, right? So our brains haven't stopped just because we're older. We still have a capacity for a growth mindset rather than a fixed mindset. So we're not going to do the things that we used to do because we're getting results that we don't want. That's the fixed mindset, right? So I think all of that is really important. And that requires, again, a holistic understanding about who we are, who we want our children to see, both in life and in death.
Exactly.
You know, it's a big subject that we simply aren't having. We're not having those conversations.
And we should be.
We should be, definitely.
I also think it's important to understand that they say that wealth that's accumulated only lasts for 3 generations.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And I think it's important for children and grandchildren to think about their life without an expectation of inheritance, and to figure out how they can move from zero to build wealth. And the reason that I think that is because even if you do have an inheritance, it's not going to be sufficient to last you a lifetime. So that doesn't mean that it's not important for a beginning. And for many of us, we start negative, you know, with student loans and no assets. But I think that even if you do have, you know, family assets, and you say, well, what if they sold them all? I think it's, you know, one is to have the expectation of zero, and how can you build from there? But to also understand, and this is an important part of our community, is to understand that it's about more than money. that there is a generational learning that we also need to take advantage of. You know, how was that wealth built? Okay, it may have been sold, but how was it built? And what can I learn to duplicate how it was built? And I think that's that's a part. Yeah, that's something that I think we lost with integration.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, we used to have that all around. Those, you know, we lived together, we banked together, we built together, we bought together, and all of those things were passed from generation to generation. And we became integrated, and all of a sudden, you know, we felt like their ice was colder.
Yeah, right.
And that we were going to learn something new, and that what, you know, grandma or mom, you know, or dad knew wasn't really of any value, and and they didn't leave us anything either, you know. And we need to go back and say, well, you might not have left me dollars, but there's a lot that you learned in your lifetime that I need to take advantage of so that I don't make the same mistakes.
Actually, as you were speaking, I was thinking about Michelle Singletary, who is a columnist for the Washington Post, and most of her, she's very knowledgeable about financial literacy, but a lot of her lessons started with her grandmother, which she is telling you all the time about how it happens. There's an investment question for you, Glenn, and I'm sorry, can you all repeat it? Hello? Oh, that's more of a financial literacy question. It's about investments, and if you don't have enough, I think what Zia Mora was saying was just start wherever you are and then build from there.
Every time you get a raise, you put more.
Absolutely. It's hard to do, but it is worth it.
You make it automatic. So that my friend told me, an economist told me, Mary, if you start this annuity, don't ever stop, no matter what the economy does. Just keep contributing to it. Every promotion you get, you keep contributing to it. And it was the wisest advice I've ever been given in my life.
And we haven't talked about it. I think it's kind of subtle here. Is also how we spend.
Oh,
I mean, we
wasn't that subtle?
We like to spend some money.
$8 net worth.
So, but you know, I mean, I learned this from my father. Around, you know, really, like, you know, there's a wisdom to frugality in the right way, and so.
Well, you know, part of that, and this is not an excuse, and I know all of you will understand what I'm saying, and particularly Mary has left this cultural context to it. Sometimes, at the end of the day, and I've said it myself, so I'm guilty. I have worked too hard not to have whatever. Because getting to the next step to get whatever feels a long way. So right now, just give me a little something.
That's right. Well, and most times you've earned that.
Right, yeah.
But I think what really, that's a great call out, because that's the first step around mindfulness, is that, you know, it's like sometimes we have the separation of the person who made the money and the person who spent the money. And like they're two different people. It's like, you know, Jekyll and Hyde out here. And so, you know, when you have those thoughts, thinking about, okay, so, and meanwhile, imagine you've established some sort of goal that you're after. So it's like, is buying these pair of shoes or eating out for $30, right? It's kind of all it takes. Or spending $2 extra over lunch, is that worth more than X, Y, and Z goal that I'm trying to attain? Like, I was doing the math earlier today about spending $2 extra over lunch, and I was like, well, it's $2 times 20, you know, 20 days, you know, working days, 40, and then you say 40 times, you know, 12, right? And before you know it, you're like, wow, so if I just want to spend a little bit more, you know, am I willing to spend, you know, say, an additional, you know, $400 more a year, and that's pre-tax. Let's really have to make about another $600 a year, pre-tax rather, in order just to spend a couple of extra dollars a month. And is that worth it? And when you start thinking in those terms, it's a different conversation that you're having with yourself.
But you're setting goals,
right?
It's also sometimes it's just after you've done it, it's not that satisfying. Then you're really mad.
You're not going to
you messed up on two fronts. All right, you all have been delightful. You've offered up you've dropped some knowledge, as everybody said. I'm sure this is going to be a show that will be looked at many, many times. I thank you all for joining me.
Thank you so much. Thank you.